This is the case study for the Missing Booster Club funds for EDL 854. As far as what I know going into this is that there's an inaccuracy of money taken versus the tickets sold. The school has had a system to account for the concession items. They do pre-inventory and post-inventory, and they log that with what has actually been sold. And they also have pre-numbered tickets to prevent mishandling of money. Parent volunteers are the ones who are in charge of handling the money, and the principal oversees then the deposit after the events. Going into this, a parent had the need for the money. So in terms of volunteering, she was predisposed to need to take it. The game in question was at capacity for seating, so there should have been a clear picture of how many tickets could have potentially been sold. The school in question is also in a lower socioeconomic area, which impacts the parents in the community. Prior to this, the principal had denied a family's request to support the daughter's trip to New York for cheerleading because it was not a school-sponsored program. And then going into the game, a parent had used a $50 bill to pay his entry, and that bill was missing from the deposit. And the principal makes the deposit in the presence of a school security guard, so he does not make that deposit without somebody able to watch or acknowledge what's potentially going on. Other things that I need to know going into this is, number one is who else was selling the tickets? Was that parent working by herself, or was there somebody else who was potentially helping and may have witnessed a parent pocketing the money? Have there ever been any inaccuracies before? And if so, how are those handled? Did it happen with the principal who's currently working there or previous principals, previous administrators? And then what happened to the tickets that were damaged? Were those still accounted for somewhere else? If they were damaged, they should not have been given away. And so did they just get tossed, supposedly, or are they stored in another location? So really right now the problem is that the principal is probably dealing with the situation of theft from a parent volunteer. He's now going to have to navigate handling the situation, how to address the parent, and how to set up volunteering in the future, something that the school desperately needs to have. As far as the proposed plan of action, I think that the security guard needs to immediately acknowledge the discrepancy while at the bank. I think that the principal also needs to contact the other parent volunteers to inquire about the night sales to see if there's any corroboration on the tickets being damaged and on the parent who may have potentially taken the money. Based on those results, the principal might have an easier conversation. Following those questions, the parent does need to come in for a meeting with the principal to just kind of go over what happened and to acknowledge that parent's account of the evening. And then the principal needs to make some changes to how the tickets are actually sold. So if there are damaged tickets, what happens to those tickets? Making sure that they're accounted for, making sure that there are multiple people in question who are marking that or documenting the situation. And then I actually think it would be a good idea for the principal to brainstorm ways to potentially support the student's trip to New York City without costing the school anything. And by this I mean simply looking at ways to acknowledge or alert to the community that there is a student who is in need of some support for this opportunity, and so that the community can see the principal's support beyond just what happens in the school. As far as implementation, I think that there needs to be multiple people present for the conversation with Mrs. Bowman, the parent in question. I don't think that should be a conversation that the principal has in isolation with her. And I also think when he's talking with her, to avoid accusations and focus more on the details of the night. I think he needs to acknowledge the missing $50 bill with her, and then he also needs to address the location of the damaged tickets just so that he can get some more information from her perspective as he proceeds with what happens from there. I do think in a private meeting with Miss Bowman, he should address the clear need to help support Lucy with the trip. I think he needs to remind her that the school cannot pay for the trip simply because it's not in the funds, one, and two, that it doesn't align with district policy in terms of what the school is able to provide money for in terms of the students, because it's not a school-sponsored event. I also think that there needs to be policies at his desk or at his disposal when he talks with her, to make sure that parents are able to kind of understand what the financial expectations are, especially if parent volunteers are going to be handling the money. Following these conversations, I think that the principal needs to have a parent volunteer meeting to revisit procedures for those roles and expectations, where he can address processes for damaged tickets. I think he can address the process for accurate inventory and address the process that he uses to make deposits so that they understand what he does once they hand over the money to him for the night. As far as the resolution and the focus on all kids, the loss of funds, which is $50, is a fairly minimal amount in the grand scheme of things, but when the school loses money, it really is a matter of the kids losing opportunities. So it's important that this is not just swept under the rug. I think the situation is difficult because the parent in question was not always supervised, and the accusations could be damaging, and it could tarnish his ability, the principal's ability, to get volunteers in the future. And you really don't want to lose the volunteers because the school needs that support because of the area in which they live and the need for some extra help. And then I think Lucy, while she's not competing for the school, she needs to feel supported by the school, but funds specifically for her are going to take away from everyone else. And I think that just needs to be revisited with Mrs. Bowman. While she might not feel that way, I think the principal needs to really be able to clearly articulate what the financial policy is. And then I think the financial policy needs to be revisited in an appropriate way for parents to understand how funding is dispersed and how money raised through volunteer help benefits the school, because then more of the money is actually able to go to the students rather than having to pay for people to fulfill those responsibilities. As far as what I was thinking when we were going through this, I was really thinking about how the principal had a clear process in place to avoid situations like this, and that the parents should definitely be there to hold one another accountable. I also thought the principal was good about handling the deposits professionally. That takes a lot of time, and he definitely went above and beyond to make sure that the deposit happened in a timely manner, and that he had somebody else present, specifically the security guard, to ensure there was no flaw in his system. And then I also spent time thinking about the family and their inability to support the kids, leading to the situation and how that potentially is impacting the rest of the students in the school. I put a lot of value on the need to do the right thing and to hold people accountable for their actions. I think it's important to acknowledge you understand what took place and to kind of proceed from there. But I also valued really not handling the situation in an accusatory manner. I think that could be really damaging, and I think the amount at stake makes this a little bit less of a serious issue, but it's one that has to be addressed. I also value the principal's stance on not supporting the money going to a specific student who is not taking this trip on behalf of the school. And then I really do value the parents' desire to want their daughter to be able to travel to New York City. And I think it's tough for them to not be able to provide that opportunity, but I think it's important to recognize where they could potentially get support. Throughout this, I definitely felt frustration from the principal's perspective. You should be able to trust these volunteers, and if they're coming in to help out, it's just really damaging when somebody violates that trust. I feel sorry for the family and the other families in the school too, not being able to support their kids the way that they would like to be able to. And then I also felt shame for the mom, just in terms of her feeling like this is something that she had to do. And then I felt some uncertainty about how to actually go through with solving this problem and not causing a major disruption to the school system and the workings, especially since it's kind of in the middle of the year and you don't want that to impact the way the school runs for the remainder of the school year. As far as unresolved issues, I think one, I'm still unresolved a little bit on how to handle the parent in question. What sort of consequences should she face, if any? Should she not be allowed to volunteer anymore? Does there need to be, for sure, a direct accusation? And what is the district process, if there is one that exists, in handling this? I also want to look at how to support the families in situations like Lucy is in for the future. So if the school can't provide any funds directly, what could we potentially do to support the kid and ensure that they are able to get this opportunity? So how can we work with the community to make sure that this possibility doesn't just go by the wayside? And then I also think that there are specific processes that need to change or contracts that need to be put in place for parent volunteers who handle money. But again, I'm not entirely sure what the district policy would be in regards to setting up contracts if a parent is going to be specifically handling the money. As far as effectiveness and efficiency, I think it's really effective that the security guard acknowledged the discrepancy to address the issue up front. I think without that happening, the principal's in a really tricky spot. I think it's important to address the needs to change the procedures, and I think that makes it a more effective process, a more efficient process, so that parents are still able to continue collecting money, but that there is a little bit more accountability on their part when they do. And then I think it's important to acknowledge with the community about the need to maintain specific practices surrounding school finances, especially in a struggling socioeconomic area. I think for them to understand that the management of money for the school to maximize student opportunity is really important. As far as promoting social learning, a lot of this actually comes down to the adults and the principal in this situation, but I think it's important for the principal to not miss the opportunity to realize that Lucy and her family need some extra support and that the community could really rally around her. I think that Lucy could really look at setting up some fundraising opportunities, and that the school could potentially help with some of those things in terms of lessons about financial planning, advocacy, outreach, and developing community within some of those programs that she might be in. And then I also think the social learning goes back to the parent volunteers as they learn how to hold one another accountable, so that their students can actually have the events that they love without losing more money for other things within the school. The students definitely have access to academic learning through this. I mean, when you lose funds, you're not going to be able to have the support that you need to have for everything, but it's important too that most of the learning comes through the administration and the parent volunteers. He needs to really make sure that his community is clear on the procedures he employs and why they exist. I think the learning has to happen there as well. And then I also think that the learning really needs to show that Lucy is not the one that should be held accountable, and that her academic experience isn't impacted negatively by what her parent potentially did. And then I also think that the students can continue to grow and they can continue to learn by helping Lucy and her family come up with ways to raise funds to support her on her trip. As far as this case study went, it was really kind of tough for me in the sense that it seemed like there was a very clear picture that the parent, Ms. Bowman, was at fault here. But again, when you don't have somebody who's able to acknowledge the actual theft and to comment on it, the accusation becomes really tough. And so it really comes down to changing some of the procedures to make sure that things are handled differently in the future to avoid this situation. And so while the funds lost weren't significant, it does highlight the need to really make sure that the procedures in the future are set and kind of impeccable and flawless so that the principal doesn't face these situations with future volunteers. Thank you.